On the distant and elegant planet of Gelaris, where silver towers touched the clouds and blue rivers glowed under to moons, Princess Alira moved through the royal library with a troubled heart and questions no one could answer. Her people, the Varnath, were proud and ancient, known for their wisdom and tradition, but now they stood on the edge of fear as war stirred in distant corners of the galaxy. Alira had grown up with strict rules, endless diplomacy, and the heavy weight of future responsibility, yet she never imagined her world would shift because of something hidden deep within the palace walls. One quiet morning, while searching through dusty archives sealed since the Great Galactic War, she found a thin, forgotten box marked with the old royal seal and the words interspecies pact classified. Her curiosity burned stronger than any warning from the High Council. Carefully, she opened it and found a faded holodisc. The flickering image of her late grandfather appeared, speaking to someone unknown. Behind him stood Varnath officials and a tall figure in dark armor, human, unmistakably human. The name Commander Jace Thorne echoed from the recording. The message shocked her. To prevent total extinction, a pact had been made between humanity and the Varnath, a royal bond to unite their two most powerful bloodlines. According to the document, Princess Alira, future Queen of Gelaris, was promised to this human warrior, who was once a hero, a protector, and possibly the only chance for true unity between the two species. But the marriage never happened. The war grew worse, the humans vanished behind the void wall, and the record was buried. Alira stared at her name on the ancient scroll beside his, sealed by blood signatures and witnessed by both councils. How could it be? She had never met him, never even heard of such a bond, yet the proof was undeniable. Was it simply forgotten or deliberately hidden? Her breath caught with a mix of confusion and fascination. Who was this Jace Thorne, and why did her people never speak of him? She summoned the Palace AI, demanded every file available on the human commander, but found little fragments of war footage, a few mentions in battle reports, and one haunting phrase from a soldier's log. Thorne fights like a storm that never ends. Alira began to feel something strange, not just curiosity, but a connection she couldn't explain, as if a silent thread from her soul reached across the stars. The more she studied, the clearer it became that someone had wanted this alliance erased. Perhaps they feared what the humans could do, or perhaps they feared what a Varnath-human union might bring. Her council refused to answer her questions, brushing off the discovery as irrelevant, but she could see the fear in their eyes, the desire to keep her quiet. That night, standing alone in her chamber, she watched the stars beyond the glass wall and made her decision. If Commander Jace Thorne was still alive, hidden behind the void wall or lost in time, she would find him, not just because a treaty demanded it, not because tradition told her to, but because something inside her needed to know the truth. She issued a secret order to a trusted pilot, Captain Rin Solon, and prepared a stealth vessel equipped for deep space travel beyond known charts. Only for crew members would join her, all loyal, all sworn to silence. As they launched into the unknown, the stars seemed colder, more distant than ever. Alira felt the weight of destiny pressing against her shoulders. For the first time in her life, she wasn't following the path laid before her, she was writing a new one. And somewhere beyond the galactic silence, a human warrior who had once stood between light and darkness might still be waiting. As the ship crossed into the outer rim, leaving Gelaris behind, Alira stared into the blackness and whispered his name, not as a princess, but as someone whose world was about to change forever. The stars grew darker as Princess Alira's ship passed through the edge of known space, moving beyond the void wall, a mysterious and dangerous boundary that had swallowed hundreds of ships over the years, leaving only silence behind. Her crew, silent and tense, followed her orders as they entered a place no Varnath had dared to visit in decades, a realm filled with forgotten signals, broken satellites, and drifting metal remains from wars long past. The ship's lights flickered, sensors twitched, and for hours there was only static on every channel. But Alira remained calm, staring at the swirling shadows of empty space as if something were calling to her. Then, without warning, the ship's console beeped once. Then, again a signal was detected, faint but human in origin, coded in a language almost no one on Jalaris still studied. Captain Wren quickly confirmed it, an ancient human military encryption, barely functioning, but real. Elira's heart raced. She gave the order to follow it, and soon they found the source, a large human warship floating among debris, its hull scarred, but its engine still burning faint blue. It was alone, silent, but alive. Elira's ship sent a signal. At first, there was no answer, only the echo of static, until a voice finally broke through, rough and cautious. "Identify yourself or prepare to be fired upon." The voice was deep and human, filled with suspicion and strength, and Elira knew this had to be him. She responded gently, giving her name and rank. Then the silence returned for a long minute. At last, the voice answered, "Impossible. You're a ghost from a lie." Moments later, docking permission was granted. Elira boarded the warship with Wren, stepping into dark, narrow halls filled with flickering lights and the heavy scent of old oil and metal. Armed drones followed them through the corridors. Finally, they reached a command deck where a tall man stood near the central console, armored in black and silver, his face shadowed by age and war. His eyes, cold and tired, locked onto Elira's. "You're real," he said softly. "More to himself than anyone else." It was Commander Jace Thorne. He didn't bow or salute, just stared like someone seeing a dream he once buried. Elira told him everything: the lost pact, the archive, the sealed order of marriage, but Jace didn't believe her at first. He had been abandoned, betrayed, left to fight with a dying crew as allies turned enemies, as his world fell apart. He thought the Varnath broke their promise, his people fell, and he alone survived, fueled by rage and loss, drifting for years behind the void wall. As she spoke, his anger showed, but so did confusion, as if a part of him wanted to believe. Elira shared the documents, the recordings, and the oath sealed by their ancestors. Slowly, doubt filled his eyes. The truth had been hidden from both sides. Perhaps they had both been victims of something larger, something that wanted them apart. When she asked him to return with her, to fulfill the pact and help prevent a new war, Jace laughed bitterly. "You don't know what I've become," he said. "I'm not the man they promised you." But Elira stood firm. "Maybe not," she said, "but you are the man history forgot and the man my people still need." Jace didn't answer. Instead, he looked out the window at the cold void beyond. "If I come back," he said at last, "it won't be as a prince or hero, it will be as a warrior who remembers everything." Elira nodded. "Then come as you are." He turned, armor heavy on his shoulders, and after a long moment, agreed. As the warship turned toward Jalaris, with Turace's hopes quietly shifting in, the stars, neither of them saw the dark vessel that watched from the distance, silent and waiting, carrying secrets of its own. When Jace Thorne returned to Jalaris aboard his old human warship, the skies above the royal city turned quiet, not with peace, but with tension so sharp it could be felt in every corner of the capital. People gathered in the streets, confused and afraid, whispering about the large vessel that hovered over the palace towers like a forgotten myth returned from the dark. Inside the royal court, council members stood frozen as Princess Elira walked beside the tall human warrior, his armor worn but shining under the golden lights of the throne hall. Whispers filled the air, some calling it madness, others calling it betrayal. Jace did not bow. He stood still, watching every face like a soldier used to enemies on every side. The council demanded answers, called the pact ancient and meaningless, claimed the human was a ghost of war, not a rightful husband. But Elira raised her voice for the first time in many years, her words strong and clear, declaring the pact real, the bond true, and Jace the rightful protector of the royal bloodline. Some listened with respect, but many turned away, eyes filled with doubt. That night, while the city tried to sleep, Shadowy figures met in secret chambers, plotting against the princess. They believed humans were too dangerous, too wild, and that bringing Jace back would open the door to a second war. One of them, Lord Saren, a powerful noble, sent an assassin to Jace's quarters. But the human warrior was not easy to kill. When the blade came, Jace moved faster than expected, disarming the attacker and dragging him before the royal guard. The traitor said nothing, only spat at Jace and called him a curse. Alira realized then that her enemies were no longer silent. The court was breaking. Some nobles left the city, gathering soldiers in the hills. Rumors spread like fire that Alira was no longer fit to rule, that a human controlled her thoughts. The people grew nervous. Streets were guarded. Protests began. Still, Alira stood firm. She ordered the city defenses raised but told the people the truth, that long ago, the Varnath and the humans were meant to be allies, not enemies, and that her bond with Jace was not a mistake, but a promise made to save them all. Jace, meanwhile, trained the royal guard. His methods were strange fast drills, unexpected attacks, survival tactics from forgotten wars. The guards struggled at first, but they learned quickly. Even those who doubted him began to see his strength. He didn't try to win their hearts. With words, he showed them what he had survived, what it meant to be human. In private, Alira and Jace spoke little, but something grew between them, not just duty, but a strange comfort, as if the silence between their words held meaning neither fully understood. Then came the worst news. Scouts returned with reports that Lord Saren had formed a rebel army in the northern regions, using fear and lies to gather support. He planned to march on the capital within days. The council panicked. Some begged Alira to break the pact and send Jace away. Others fled. But Alira stood before the people again, this time beside Jace, and declared that if Saren wanted a war, they would face it together. The people, torn between fear and hope, watched closely. As rebel forces gathered at the borders, Alira prepared the defense of her city while Jace led training drills day and night. There were moments of doubt, long silences, when even she questioned if the return of the human warrior had brought ruin instead of salvation. But every time she looked at Jace, standing firm with fire in his eyes, she felt the answer in her heart. He was not her enemy. He was the only one who had never lied to her. The night before the battle, while the city lights dimmed under a red moon, Alira stood with Jace on the high wall, watching the dark hills where enemy fires glowed. She asked him if he ever thought of turning back. He said he had thought of it once, long ago, but not now. You're not alone, he told her, and I won't leave you to fight them alone. In the silence that followed, Alira realized that everything had changed, not just her world, but her heart. She no longer feared what others thought. She feared only what would happen if they failed. As dawn approached, the rebel army moved closer, and the battle for the future of Jalaris was about to begin. Not just a war of weapons, but a war of belief, of trust, and of something even deeper that neither she nor Jace had yet spoken aloud. The sky above Jalaris turned gray as the rebel army gathered at the edge of the city, their banners waving in the cold wind and their machines of war lining the hills with deadly precision, while within the capital walls, Alira stood beside Jace Thorn, her face calm, but her heart racing, knowing this was not just a battle for land or rule. It was a battle for trust, for unity, and for the future of two great peoples. The rebels shouted that the human must be cast out, that tradition must be restored, and that Alira had lost her mind. But inside the city, something had changed, something quiet but powerful. More and more people began to believe in her, too. Believe that this human warrior, who had come from the shadows of forgotten space, might be the one to protect them when no one else could. Jace, dressed not in royal colors, but in his old battle armor, led the defense like a seasoned commander, his voice steady, his orders sharp, and the Varnath guards, who once feared him, now followed him with respect, their eyes filled with a fire they hadn't felt in years. The gates were sealed, the towers manned, and the shield walls activated as the enemy moved into position. Then came the first strike, a rain of fire from the rebel artillery lighting the sky and shaking the ground. Buildings trembled, the crowd screamed, and panic rose like smoke. But Jace was already in motion, pushing his soldiers into defensive lines, calling out targets, guiding the shield arrays with perfect timing. Alira moved among the wounded, calming civilians, helping children escape the burning zones, and even lifting a fallen guard to safety with her own arms. She was not hiding in the palace. She was part of the fight, as the rebels pushed forward. Using hover tanks and sonic cannons, Jace ordered a risky counterattack, sending a hidden unit through the underground tunnels to strike their rear supply lines. The mission was dangerous, but it worked. Explosions ripped through the rebel camp, and for the first time, their lines faltered. But the battle was far from over. Lord Saren, leading the rebels himself, activated a strange device on the battlefield, and from it came waves of pulsing energy that disrupted the city's shields. And then from the shadows emerged creatures, hybrids, twisted beings, part Varnath, part unknown, their bodies altered by war experiments from long ago. Alira watched in horror as these monsters tore through the city's outer lines, faster and stronger than any soldier, and she realized this was not just a civil war, it was something darker. Someone had planned this from the beginning, and the goal was not just to remove her but to destroy everything. Jace rushed into the fight, taking down 2 of the beasts with plasma rounds, moving with the focus of a man who had fought such things before. He shouted for reinforcements, but the lines were breaking. In a desperate moment, Jace took a hit, meant for Alira, a piece of shrapnel tearing through his side, and he dropped to the ground, blood spilling on the stone. Alira knelt beside him, her hand shaking as she tried to stop the bleeding, but he grabbed her wrist and said, "Don't. Stop now. You have to finish this. They follow you." With tears in her eyes and rage in her heart, she stood, took his rifle, and led the charge. Herself, her voice rising above the chaos, calling her people to stand. The Varnath soldiers followed her with new strength, fighting harder, pushing back the rebels and the hybrid beasts, step by step, block by block, as the sun broke through the smoke above. Alira reached the rebel command center and faced Lord Saren, who sneered at her and said she had broken her bloodline by trusting a human. She said nothing at first, then answered calmly, "If keeping my blood pure means killing my people, then I don't want it." They fought hand to hand, and though Saren was strong, Alira struck him down with a blast from Jace's weapon, ending the battle. With their leader gone and their forces scattered, the rebels fled or surrendered. The strange beasts vanished as quickly as they had come, and silence fell over Jalaris once more. Alira returned to Jace, who was still alive, barely, and held his hand as medics worked to save him. Around them, soldiers cheered, civilians wept, and the city began to breathe again. In that moment, the people of Jalaris did not see a human or a Varnath, they saw 2 hearts that had fought as one. The city of Jalaris stood in silence after the great battle, its towers blackened with smoke and its streets littered with broken stone and scattered weapons. But deep within the royal medical chamber, Alira sat beside Jace Thorn, her eyes fixed on the still form of the human warrior who had fought not for power or fame, but for her people, and for a forgotten promise that now meant everything. His body was weak, covered in bandages and deep bruises, and though the medics had done all they could, they warned that he might not wake again. But Alira refused to leave his side, her fingers wrapped around his hand, whispering quiet words. Only he could hear. Outside, the city was changing. The remaining nobles, who once stood against her, had fallen silent, their power broken by the truth of what had happened. The people, once divided, now looked to Alira with hope and trust, calling her not only princess but a true ruler. News spread that the rebels were gone and the strange creatures had vanished with them, leaving behind only questions and fear. But Alira knew in her heart that the danger was not entirely over. Somewhere in the stars, someone had sent those creatures, someone who had not wanted peace between Varnath and human, and though they had won this fight, the shadow behind it still lingered. Days passed, and Jace did not open his eyes. Alira spoke to him each morning and each night, telling him how the guards he trained were rebuilding the city, how the young soldiers now wore his colors as a sign of unity, and how the people had accepted the truth about the ancient pact. She told him that his name was no longer just a story in an old archive, it was a name spoken with honor. Then, one quiet night, as she dozed in her chair, his fingers moved. Slowly, painfully, his eyes opened. He turned his head and saw her, and in a voice barely louder than a breath, he asked, "Did we win?" Alira smiled through her tears and nodded. "Yes," she said softly, "but not without you." As he recovered, the palace slowly returned to order. Jace remained quiet, never asking for praise, but everywhere he walked, people stopped and bowed not because he demanded it, but because they respected him. The council met again, this time with new voices, younger, wiser, more willing to see a future beyond old rules. And when Alira stood before them and declared that the ancient bond would no longer be hidden, that she would honor it not just as a duty, but as a choice, the hall fell silent. She looked at Jace, who stood beside her in formal armor, his scars visible, his eyes steady. "This man," she said, "fought for us when he had every reason to walk away. He was promised to me long ago, and though time and war kept us apart, fate has brought him back, not as a stranger, but as the one who stood when others fled, who bled when others watched, and who protected our world when we had lost all hope." Jace said nothing, but a quiet strength filled the room. The council voted, and for the first time in centuries, the ancient pact was renewed no longer as a forgotten document, but as a living truth. Alira and Jace stood before the people on the day of light, when both moons aligned and cast silver fire across the palace steps. The crowd stretched as far as the eyes could see, Varnath and human descendants standing side by side, cheering not for a war, but for a new beginning. As Alira reached for his hand, she looked into Jace's eyes and felt something deep and real, something born not from old tradition, but from everything they had suffered, fought, and built together. "You were lost to time," she whispered, "but you came back. You always come back." And as he held her hand and the crowd roared, Jace Thorn, once a forgotten soldier beyond the void, became not just her protector or her partner but her rightful husband, and the living symbol of two worlds finally ready to become one.